What's going on, everybody? So the month of February is upon us, and right now we're not getting a lot of great films being released to theaters. Most of what I'm watching currently is on streaming services and catching up on films that might have had limited runs in 2021. This gives me a lot of time to do some fun videos that I'm really excited for. And today's video I'm really looking forward to because I haven't done one of these in a while. But I really like doing these compare and contrast videos of original films and remakes. Today I'm talking about one of my favorite franchise of films of all time, The Evil Dead. A while back, during the month of October, I did a review of Evil Dead 2, which is arguably my favorite horror film of all time. And what I love about that film is just the over-the-top nature of the comedy, but how it's also a grounded horror film that's genuinely terrifying and psychologically traumatizing at points. And it's one that I've always really enjoyed, and it's one that I keep coming back to and gain more appreciation for over time. I didn't really spend much time talking about any of the other Evil Dead films in that video, so I thought it would be fun to look at Sam Raimi's original Evil Dead and the 2013 Fede Álvarez Evil Dead films and kind of look at the two of them, the differences between the two of them, and how obviously the 2013 one was loosely inspired by the original film, but how it takes its own approach. I genuinely enjoy both films for different reasons. I recently rewatched the 2013 film for the first time in a long time. I saw it in the theater when it was first released a couple years after I picked up the Blu-ray. But it was almost like watching it with a fresh perspective, and I'm really glad that I did because I enjoyed it quite a bit. Obviously, I'm going to start out this video by talking about the 1981 original Evil Dead, the Sam Raimi film. I have such a fondness for Sam Raimi as a filmmaker. I love Bruce Campbell, but what is really impressive to me about the original 1981 Evil Dead film is just how that movie had virtually no budget. It was a guy who had a vision, who wanted to create something, got together some people that he was close to, that worked on the project with him, and was able to create this really horrifying piece of cinema that I think to this day still holds up. I know there's a lot of people who would probably argue that the effects aren't very good and that it's a little over the top, but I still to this day, when I put on the original Evil Dead, feel terrified when I watch it. There's something about the over the top and dark nature of the comedy elements that the demons put forward, or the possessed in this film, that there's this menacing nature to them and the almost playfulness of the evil acts that they're committing that make this movie so just demented and disturbing. The original Evil Dead, you have a very simple premise. You have this group of friends who travel to this cabin in the middle of nowhere. They're going to spend some time together. Where they got this cabin and why you would want to go to this dingy place in the middle of nowhere, no one knows. They get out there, they start spending some time together, they find a book in the basement that has this old tape recorder next to it that explains that it's the Book of the Dead. There's a bunch of stuff in there that tells them not to read out of the book, and because they're idiot kids, they read out of the book anyway, and then one by one they get possessed and start killing each other off. It's the most simplistic premise to a film that could exist, but it's executed damn near flawlessly. You have all of these little intricate details with the camera movements. My favorite thing is when deadites first start to get infected, where the wind coming through, well, it's the entity, but it looks like wind moving through the trees, and just the way that that is filmed. You do some background information and research into how Sam Raimi pulled off those camera movements. When they would have it crash through the window, they would actually rig the camera up to like a log, and they would just look at the actors and say, "Run," and they would just let it go through, crash through the window. And I know Sam Raimi's talked before about how they would never be able to get away with some of the stuff they got away with filming the original Evil Dead, because I know they used live rounds in a lot of the guns that they were using in the film. It's just really impressive. Those camera movements of the entity moving through the woods is just iconic. Been used in other films. A lot of people have copy and pasted that, but it's something you never forget when you watch it, and just that feeling that those characters have of being trapped and isolated in this place and they can't get away from it, and just how large this presence is and the way it navigates through the woods, and then each character becoming possessed and how it taunts these other characters by flipping back to their original personality and utilizing these real personal elements that each character has between each other, because obviously they're young kids that are in relationships and looking at the other one saying like, how could you do this to me? How could you hurt me? And it's the most evil and menacing things that a demon could do to someone else. There really is just this overwhelming sense of fear, and like, if I was in that situation, what would I do? Because you're looking at someone you care about turn into this awful presence, and you're gonna have to kill it because there's no other way to get it out of the person. And it's just really well executed. The gore in this movie is really over the top. It's obviously all practical effects. It sticks with you, just the color of the blood and just how gross and disgusting it is. It really has always stuck with me, and I feel like it still holds up all these years later. And looking at the 2013 one afterwards, obviously there's a lot more that they can do now, even though there is a large amount of practical effects used in that film, which is really impressive. But the difference in what you can do with a much higher budget now than what Sam Raimi was working with in 1981 is really impressive. And The Evil Dead, the original film, it establishes Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams character for the films to come. This movie, he's kind of an afterthought at the beginning because you as an audience member don't know who's going to be that leading role, but he sort of takes charge at the end of the film. But I like that he's very sloppy in this movie, and that he doesn't really know what he's doing. He just knows he has to survive, compared to Evil Dead 2, where he's like becomes a superhero, and then Army of Darkness, where it's even more over the top and the things that he can do because he's this prophesized chosen one. The original Evil Dead, despite, there's elements of this movie that are incredibly dated. Obviously, the scene with the tree in this film, filmmaker would not be able to get away with that now. They sort of reference it in the 2013 film. It's much tamer than it is in the 81 movie. It's very disturbing and it's very jarring when you see it the first time. A movie like this is never going to exist again, and it's definitely a unique gem, and it's one that I'm going to continue to watch over and over again because I just adore this franchise. And I think that there's this lighthearted comedic tone mixed in with this really evil and mented horror sequences that are violent, grotesque, over the top, but also have that comedy edge. And I know Sam Raimi said before that with the original Evil Dead, he was really just going for a straightforward horror film, and I think it works as that. There are some moments that come off as unintentionally campy, and he obviously played way more into that in Evil Dead 2, which I'll put a link in for my review of that film, which I think is far superior to the original. I like it for a lot of different reasons. That's my thoughts on Evil Dead. It's a flawless horror film that I enjoy watching more and more. And so when you go into talking about the 2013 film, you wonder how can you take a film like that that's so raw and gritty and that was filmed on such a low budget, how do you take that and translate it into something and modernize it? And I think Fede Álvarez does a phenomenal job. I don't like it as much as the original Evil Dead film, but I think that it stands on its own and it's really great. Has some really good performances in it, and it utilizes the budget to its advantage in that there are some really disturbing shit in this film. The 2013 film, you have Jane Levy's character Mia, who is addicted to drugs, and this film depicts her brother and her friends taking her to this cabin in the woods to help her from relapsing again and to help her kind of kick her drug habit. And the beginning of the film spends a lot more time establishing Mia's character and just what she's been through in the relationship between her and her brother, and how this isn't the first time she's tried to kick her drug habit. It adds this additional emotional core to the film. It presents itself in this way that the possession can be symbolic of what one goes through with drug addiction and how it affects the people around them, despite them trying to kick this habit that they're going through. And it's really, at its core, a really great, gritty, violent horror film. But it also has that additional element of looking at drug addiction and the horrors that drug addiction can cause to families and to the person who is affected by this. I really like that about this film because it could just be a generic copy and paste of the original Evil Dead, but I think adding that emotional element to the film lets it stand on its own. I talked about it before in my Suspiria review, where you have the original Dario Argento Suspiria film that very much at its core is a bright, vivid horror movie that is just about showcasing the surroundings, the horrific violence that occurs in the film, and there really isn't much of a deep emotional core in that movie. And then you look at the Luca Guadagnino 2018 remake, which takes the basis of the original Suspiria and turns it into this really emotional and impactful film. And that's what I liked about this Evil Dead remake, is it's very similar to the Guadagnino Suspiria remake in that it takes this very simplistic premise that the original Evil Dead has and adds this emotional core to it. And I think it works for this film in particular, and it establishes a rapport with these characters that makes you care a lot more when they start getting killed off one by one. And what it also does is it makes you care a lot for Mia's character, who is obviously the one who gets possessed, because not only is she dealing with this possession and she turns into this really just horrible, awful creature who is torturing these people who have come to try to help her, which obviously you could parallel that to drug addiction and how that can control and harm people around you. You already know what she's been through and all of the things that being addicted to drugs have caused in her life. And it just makes you hurt for her character despite terrible actions that she's doing to other people. This movie does a really great job of accenting the original film in making the Deadite characters very sadistic and disturbing. Mia's character is really the only one who speaks. The rest of the characters that get infected by the Deadite, infected if you want to call it that, or possessed by a demonic entity, they're more just menacing and committing these violent acts towards one another. Whereas in the original Sam Raimi Evil Dead, they're very vocal, which adds that like quirky, over-the-top element. Also makes them a little more sadistic. Mia's character has those moments, but you can tell it's much more restrained, and that Fede Álvarez really wanted to more focus on the horrific acts of violence in this movie, which they are horrific. The over-the-top gore in this film is like, it's just disgusting when you watch it. It makes you feel gross. You can tell that Fede Álvarez really wanted to put as much blood as humanly possible. The third act of this film actually has blood raining from the sky, which is a lot of times I would say is a little over the top and absurd, but I feel like this movie earns it throughout the remaining of the runtime of the film. Necronomicon in this film, comparatively to the original film, obviously you have that goofy looking face on it in the original. I love the design of the original Necronomicon. This one is very like almost hyper realistic looking. It's wrapped in a garbage bag and has like barbed wire around it that the guy has to cut off, and then it really just looks like pieces of human flesh that have been stapled together as the binding of the book. I like that. It makes it a very different film. Talking about films and having their own voice, this is a movie that really does take its own approach to Evil Dead and executes it really well. I liked it a lot on this revisit, and I'm really glad I watched it because I talked about it before. There's a few circumstances over the years of remakes of horror films being really good. For instance, I talked about the Suspiria Luca Guadagnino remake, which I find superior to the original Argento film, and then you can talk about the 2012 Maniac remake, which I don't like as much as the original, but I think that it has its own unique voice and that Elijah Wood gives a really great performance. It's awesome when you put a horror franchise in someone's hands who clearly gives a damn about the material and wants to convey it in a specific way, and I think Fede Álvarez was the perfect person to give this property to. And I know Evil Dead Rise is supposed to be releasing this year. I know it's a different director. I like that they've taken it away from this cabin in the woods element. I know from reading online it says that it's going to be in like a high rise in downtown somewhere, and I'm hopeful that it'll some of that weight of this new Evil Dead film. I'm hopeful for it, and I hope that they provide a fresh new perspective on this franchise because it's a series that's very near and dear to my heart, and I enjoy these movies a hell of a lot. So have you seen the Evil Dead original film or the Evil Dead 2013 remake? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think of these films. I have a great fondness for the Evil Dead films. They're some of my favorite horror movies. I enjoy them more every time I watch them, and I would love to hear your perspective on them as well. As always, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. Right now, I'm watching a lot of horror films. I'm really enjoying the month of February because I get to watch a lot of movies that I really have been wanting to see, that have been on my watch list, or rewatching films that I really appreciate. And hopefully we'll get some new movies. I'm really excited for the Batman coming out soon. A lot of great material being released that I cannot wait for. As always, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.